Statement 7 of chapter 7. The resolve for awakening exists at the Buddha stage. So this resolve is talking about bodhicitta, specifically relative bodhicitta. So relative bodhicitta is that resolve, is that determination, is that vow, is that commitment, right? To become awake for the benefit of beings. So here again, I think more and more I see how the central issue here is that Kyopa Rinpoche is concerned to address this view or this attitude that considers the path, right, and elements on the path, such as the 4 immeasurable minds that we should cultivate, such as ethical conduct that we should, beautify, so to say, right? Think of ethical conduct as beautifying, right? Rather than controlling you, cannot do this, cannot do that. But to beautify, your person, the fragrance of ethical conduct, the fragrance of discipline. Often we think of discipline as something, very tight. But here the predominant expression is the fragrance of ethical conduct, of disciplined conduct, right? All these, like the 6 paramitas, sometimes there is a danger of thinking of them like they are instruments. In fact, I have used this expression like they are tools in the tool bag, right? And so then if we overemphasize that, we think that, oh, somehow the tools that we use now, the methods that we use now, and the final result of Buddhahood are somehow separated. Then we have a very kind of like calculative approach and attitude to practice. Oh, this is a means to get to the result. Such as Dogen's problem, right? He says, if we're already Buddha, what's the point of practice? So here you can see how Kyopa Rinpoche are making these statements that to me basically point to saying, no, like the journey is the destination, so to say. That the 4 immeasurable minds that we cultivate now, they are not just a way to get to Buddhahood, but in fact, they are the essence of what Buddhahood is, the 4 immeasurables. The 6 paramitas are not just like modes of getting to somewhere, but that somewhere that we want to get to. When we actually get there, it is nothing but the 6 paramitas, including the aspiration, the commitment, the desire to benefit beings. It is not just a method to get somewhere, but that somewhere that we want to get to is this resolve for awakening, for the benefit of beings. So the path and the fruit are understood as one, which is in other contexts what Vajrayana always talks about, using the result as the path. So if we apply this principle using the result as the path, and if we look at the elements of the path, up to including what's known as the 37 factors of awakening, which, by the way, footnote, is different from the text called the 37 Bodhisattva practices. The 37 factors of awakening has things like the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the Noble Eightfold Path, the 5 powers, things like that. So all these things that we are cultivating on the path level, they are actually the natural state of the result level. So then this again ties in Kyopa Rinpoche's emphasis on how what meditation really is, what cultivating the mind really is familiarizing the mind. Familiarizing ourselves with what is naturally there and present. Including, right? You would say, well, but bodhicitta, relative bodhicitta, isn't it like that desire to become Buddha for the sake of all beings? So that logically speaking, once you have become Buddha, do you still need that desire? Do you still need that resolve? And some will say, oh, no. Once you are Buddha, that resolve, finish, no more. Typically, that's what is said, right? Once you achieve the goal, what's the point of the resolve? Here, interestingly, Kyopa Rinpoche says, the resolve for awakening, it exists at the Buddha stage. It's not as if you become Buddha, then that resolve, poof, disappears. He says that resolve exists there, even at the Buddha stage, which is a very strong statement to me that makes this point. We should not relate to the elements that we are cultivating now as somehow merely a means to an end. And the end and the means are unrelated. See, elsewhere, there are sutra passages or commentary that says things like, for example, all levels of the path is contaminated. And only at the level of Buddha is it wholly, completely uncontaminated. Now, there is a reason why Buddha said that, which is that to understand that as long as you're not Buddha, right, there's always suffering is always involved. Confusion is always involved, right? But then that statement, right, all levels of the path is contaminated and only the Buddha result is uncontaminated, has caused some people to relate to the path as if the things that we cultivate on the path are things that you have to abandon, so that when you arrive, it's something completely different. That is an overemphasis that will affect the way we relate to the elements that we're cultivating on the path. So Kyopa Rinpoche has such a strong statement here, against the more common view, which is people claim that since Buddhahood is the finalization of the result, a Buddha no longer engages in the causes, which is the cause of Buddhahood is the resolve to become Buddha. And since you have already reached the result, you no longer occupy yourself, so to say, with that resolve, that desire. Yeah, it's sort of like, it's quite logical if you use analogy like, Oh, I really want to go to Hawaii. Oh, I really want to go to some Greek island. Oh, I really want to go to Tuscany, you know, really, 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 really. So it keeps you so motivated. You're doing everything that you can. You get there. Once you get there, you're like, okay, I'm here. It makes sense that you don't say, oh, I really want to get to some Greek island. In that way, it makes sense. But we should not think like that. Insofar as, what is the relationship between this relative bodhicitta, this resolve to become awake for the benefit of all beings, and how does this relate to the state of Buddha? You are already Buddha. Kyoba Rinpoche says, this resolve doesn't go away. Because that is the essence. That is part of the essence of being Buddha. Okay, commentary. For the perfect Buddha, the cultivation of the resolve for awakening for his own sake is such that the resolve is cultivated in the beginning and then does not exist until the end. But the cultivation of the resolve for awakening for the sake of others exists until samsara is empty. So here, I think Chodra wants to more systematically address this issue. He says that for Buddhas, while they are not yet Buddhas, while they are on the path, they have this resolve to become awake for self and for others. When they have finally become Buddha, they have no longer this resolve to become Buddha for themselves, because themselves, they have arrived there. But their resolve for others to become Buddhas continue. This is how Chudra explains this. So in a way, he explains it in a way that is not so radical, I think, especially for the Tibetan audience. This is maybe more acceptable. So he quotes, the Pittapura Sutra says, the great heroes are skilled with regards to means. The victor himself revealed Buddhahood 80 million times. Yet he eliminated the thought, this is enough. He manifests as a great hero and enters into the resolve for supreme awakening. So the sutra says, in fact, according to this sutra, Buddha Shakyamuni did not just demonstrated the appearance of achieving Buddhahood under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya 2,600 years ago in India. That this is not the only time that this awakened being that we call Buddha Shakyamuni kind of demonstrated the attainment of complete Buddha. That he has done this 80 million times. This is to emphasize, the compassion of a Buddha figure. And he eliminated the thought, oh, this is enough. As in, oh, now, like the very first time, he achieved, he went from a sentient being to Buddha. He says, okay, now enough. No. In order to show others the way, to show others the example, again and again, he manifested to demonstrate this possibility of waking up. Moreover, the last of the 22 classifications taught by Maitreya Nata through didactic examples in support for the cultivation of the resolve, such as earth, gold, moon, fire, and so forth. So these are examples of bodhicitta, analogies, were taught as the cultivation of the resolve on the Buddha stage. Namely, the three examples of pleasant sound, river, and cloud. So here he is talking about, Chudra quoting Maitreya's writings, teachings, where different types of bodhicitta is explained, and there it is shown how even at the Buddha stage, you can understand that this resolve remains. Then in an explanatory tantra of the Guhya Samaja, it says, through repeatedly cultivating the resolve, the Buddhas have purified the path for the sake of training the various beings. Showing miracles of many deeds, they have uninterruptedly cultivated the resolve, so that the resolve for awakening may never vanish. Therefore, awakened activity is uninterrupted. Yeah, so Chodra is interpreting this particular passage to show how the resolve for awakening, here specifically awakening of other beings, never stops even at the Buddha stage. Thereby, he has also taught the cultivation of the resolve at the Buddha stage as the cause of uninterrupted awakened activity. Because now at the Buddha stage, Buddha's resolve to benefit beings is uninterrupted. Therefore, the Buddha activities of benefiting beings also uninterrupted. Yeah. So let's look at Sobish's notes, telling us what he finds in the two earliest commentary, one by Dorje Sherab and one by Rinchen Changju. Yeah, and what those two commentaries, shorthand, is called Dorshema and Rinjangma. Yeah. So according to Rinchen Changju, some people say that the Sugatas have accomplished the complete cause and have brought its result to completion. Therefore, from Buddhahood on, it is not necessary for a Buddha to engage in the cause, to still have this resolve. And consequently, there is no cultivation of the resolve at the stage of Buddhahood. According to Rinchen Changchup, Jigten Sungren's teaching of the resolve for awakening at the Buddha stage follows the teaching of Acharya Haribhadra, one of the ancient Indian masters. All our commentaries state that Jigten Sungren differentiated here between benefit for oneself and benefit for others. If the resolve to benefit others did not exist at the stage of Buddhahood, the inexhaustible wheel of ornaments of body, speech, and mind would not arise. So Rinchen Changchup says, there are some who claim that there is no cultivation of the resolve on the stage of Buddhahood. If it does not exist, does it not exist for one's own benefit or for the benefit of others? For one's own benefit does already not exist at the time of the first cultivation of the resolve. If for the benefit of others would not exist, the inexhaustible wheel of ornaments of body, speech, and mind would not arise, because if the engagement in the resolve to benefit others were interrupted, there will no longer be a cause. Basically, bottom line here is saying this resolve to become Buddha as a way to free ourselves from suffering. Yes, at the Buddha stage, that is no longer there. But the resolve to benefit others continues, because that is the nature of Buddhas. Yeah? Thus, the resolve for awakening for the sake of others arises, or continues to arise, right? Until samsara is empty, like the Buddha himself. And of course, we also know that samsara will never become empty. So that means the Buddha's resolve to benefit others will never stop. Yeah? Just as Dogen, in his way of stating it, because practice, right? So you can think of the resolve for Buddhahood is a practice. Yeah? Because practice is an expression of the result. To sit in meditation is an expression of the state of Buddha. And since the state of Buddha is unending, therefore practice is also unending. Remember? I talked about this. That's how Dogen, that Japanese Zen master, resolved that question. You know, if we are already Buddhas, why do we need to practice? Of course, there's many answers you can give to that, but it is said that all the answers he heard, intellectually it made sense, but from the realization point, he wasn't getting it until he went to China and he trained with his masters. Then he finally realized, practice is not a means to get to a result. Practice is the practice of the result. In other words, now in our context, the four immeasurables is not a means to get to an end. The desire to benefit beings is not a way to get to somewhere. It is the very exercise of that somewhere that we want to go to. It's to manifest that through practice. And so therefore, here, the resolve for awakening for the sake of others continues, arises, until samsara is empty. And footnote, of course, samsara will never become empty. And therefore, the Buddha's desire to benefit beings will never stop. Like the Buddha himself, other Tathagatas also appear in various forms to engage in the cultivation of the resolve, and they manifest Buddhahood many times, like Tathagata Indraketu, who is said to be identical with the Buddha of our times. So, there was a Buddha called Indraketu. Turns out Indraketu and Shakyamuni is the same Buddha. Dojeshara further quotes Saddharma Pundarika Sutra, where the Buddha explains that he attained supreme awakening in Bodh Gaya, but had also attained it 80 million eons before that. Similarly, Chandakirti's Madhyamata Avatara is quoted, according to which the Sugatas proceed to supreme awakening as many times as there are particles in the Pure Lands. Dojeshara mentions further that Gampopa too attained Buddhahood at the time of Buddha Padmottama. At the time of Shakyamuni, he appeared as the Bodhisattva Chandra Prabha Kumara. And in the Nilgish Sewa Valley, which is in this lifetime as Gampopa, he saw the essence of the mind. He achieved Buddha again. Each time he had obviously cultivated the resolve, even though he had already attained Buddhahood. So then if you apply this in Jigten Sungren's case, it is also said that Jigten Sungren has already attained Buddha. But when we know him as Jigten Sungren, right, it is because of his resolve to benefit beings. That then he demonstrated. The disciples' example, the disciples seeking out the master, including the disciples' pride, and how the master, pulled down disciples' pride, and the hardships that he had to go through, and then to finally realize the various stages of awakening. First, he thought he already attained awakening, but then it's just a, kind of very gross realization of emptiness, and deeper realizations of emptiness, that finally leads to the realization of how things arise interdependently. All of that he went through, right, in this lifetime as Jigten Sungren. So this is also an example of Buddha activity. To see how, again, he resolved to become Buddha. Again, he resolved to become Buddha. So this is how the commentaries are using these examples to show us this point. Questions or comments? These statements all, I think in this chapter, not all, so far all the ones we've looked at, counteracts that idea that in the state of Buddhahood, because it's emphasized so much, right? In the state of Buddha, it's inconceivable. Then in our state of confusion, we think inconceivable means nothing. Here, he's emphasizing, no, it's not nothing.
I might be missing something, but it seems to me that this is so obvious that I don't understand how people...
No, it's not obvious because you have just been studying this material.
But I mean, if the whole purpose of becoming Buddha is to benefit others, and you have wisdom and compassion, the ultimate wisdom and compassion, then you don't give it up. I mean, that's what you are as Buddha.
That's because you have been listening to Gongchik. The whole time you have been exposed to Dharma, more or less. Yeah. If you study some Gelugpa, you'll find that all of this is very objectional. And they have a reason, because to them this sounds too substantial. They say, now you're sounding like Hindus. Because they emphasize if we want to kind of like step away from all the details of this and look at it from a broader view, right? I think all spiritual traditions in the world are constantly kind of pivoting or balancing two things. The ultimate state being transcendent, and the ultimate state being immanent, present. So we're dealing with absence and presence. The Buddhist tradition leans more in the direction of absence, meaning transcendence. That the Buddha state is so beyond that anything we can think of here is necessarily faulty. Yeah. Now, if that goes too far, it becomes nihilistic. Likewise here, if we emphasize the qualities, if that goes too far, it becomes essentialist. Now it's like, oh, now you're talking like God. Yeah. So within the Buddhist fold, there are some who park themselves on the emptiness side, and then there are some who park themselves on the form side, with the caveat that neither side will say it is this or it is that, but that, oh, it's beyond. It's non-dual. Yeah, if you are more familiar with like Theravada, then they'll say, oh no, all this talk about, all these qualities, the form immeasurables. In fact, like I think Leonard, I don't know if Leonard can speak, sometimes too noisy in the background, but way back when we're talking about four immeasurables, he said, yeah, in Theravada system, they say, this is how you practice the four immeasurables. You start with loving kindness because you need to start there. Then when you really advance in loving kindness, you leave it behind. Then you now have enough oomph to now practice compassion. Then from compassion, you get so good, you leave it behind. Now you have this joy. Then this joy you also need to abandon in the end so that you can have complete equanimity. And then equanimity will finally get you to awakened state where you also, even equanimity, you poof. And in the state that is awakened, nothing can be said about it.
I still think that makes more sense if you assume that Buddhas are not in the world. But if Buddhas are taking action in the world, then obviously these qualities would be exhibited. I mean,
well, that is in the Mahayana system where it says Buddha exists in the world. So then Mahayana systems will have to do a little bit more logical gymnastics. How do you allow the Buddha to be in the world, so to say? Not that we're doing any allowing, but how do you allow Buddhas to be in the world without being implicated by the sufferings of the world?
well, if you have,
So it's back to if the Buddha is sitting alone in a room with no being, no, he doesn't have any compassion, loving kindness, anything at all. To the degree we say Buddhas have loving kindness and compassion, it is a reflection on the need of the sentient being. That's how, kind of the view that emphasizes emptiness is going to insist.
Guru, yeah, just like you mentioned, some Theravada say that.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, I noticed that in the Pali text, it was regularly mentioned that the Buddha will scan the world using his psychic power, and then to exercise.
Yeah. Of course, yes. That's not the point. We know there's lots of places that will say things like that. I'm saying now we want to help Judy understand why this is an issue. This is an issue because the majority view tends to be the other view.
Correct.
Yeah, that at the state of Buddha.
When I was practicing Theravada, I had this confusion as well. When I heard you saying that, the Buddha always maintained, because in the Theravada system, after attaining Mahaparinibbana, the Buddha is
gone. Yeah, gone. As in, you cannot say anything anymore.
Well, Shakyamuni was in this world, and you can't.
Well, that is because he still had a body. But once he died, that's it. That's what they call Mahaparinirvana.
So once a Buddha, you never come back and benefit beings.
Yeah,
just reading about how Gampopa had been Buddha more than one time.
Yeah, this is different. Now we are in the Mahayana. Okay. Then within the Mahayana, even that within the Mahayana, there are two camps. And of course, Jigten Sumgön is not talking to Theravadins, he's talking to Mahayana people. So within the Mahayana camp, so to say, even when they say Buddhas exist to benefit beings, they say, we mean exist in quotes. They say, no, Buddhas don't have intentions. Yeah, so this is a problem, I can say, objectively. This is because in trying to rationally think out all the issues, which is what the Abhidharma tradition was doing, followed by all the philosophical traditions in India, Buddhist, Mahayana included, they had to come up with a theology, a doctrine that can all kind of, right? Because they're being debated. They're like, well, if you say that, then that. If you say that, and then that. If you say that, and then that, right? So then these lines have to be drawn very clearly. So like I said, the Prasangika Madhyamaka position, which is the position that, Gelugpas, Sakyapas, especially emphasize, exclusively in a way. I mean, not all, but it's hard to generalize, but generally speaking, then in that Prasangika Madhyamaka position, they say, Buddhas don't have minds anymore. We're not saying they don't exist. We're also not saying they exist. But their power to benefit beings is the residual power of all the practices on the path. And that residual power, why they explain it as a residual power? Because it frees Buddhas from needing to have intentions. Because under a certain understanding in the Abhidharma, to have intention is to have desire is to have pain. Including the desire to benefit beings, therefore, is a form of desire, is a form of intention, is productive of pain. How can Buddhas have pain? Yeah, so how do you insulate Buddhas from having pain? Then you say, oh, actually no, Buddhas don't have desire, including the desire of benefiting beings or not benefiting beings. But in their journey from confused beings to Buddhas, they have cultivated so much power. That residual power is like the sun having no intention, but simply by being present as the sun is benefiting beings. All of it makes sense under the circumstance and are emphasizing certain aspects, which I call the transcendent aspects of Buddha. So it's important to not forget that part. But here Kyoba Rinpoche wants to say, you have gone too far if you treat all these practices as instrumental. Then you cannot, I feel this is what he's saying. You cannot really genuinely think about benefiting other beings if you think, oh, this is just a way to get to the state of Buddha. As I've said, I think Kyoba Rinpoche's project, so to say, is very different from all these other people. All these other people are so kind of like, in a way, so caught up in all the debates that have gone by, that they are giving all these formulations to defend a cohesive system of thinking. Kyoba Rinpoche could care less. He comes back to, tame your mind. And so he doesn't engage in, as far as we can see, in the systematic, kind of analysis that other people consider as, part of what you have to do. He gives direct instructions. So this leads us to, again, I introduced this idea, a professor, said that if you look at Buddhist literature, if you look at Buddhist writings, if you look at Buddhist teachings, you can say that, there's basically two types of thought processes going on. One is systematic, and one is narrative. Remember, way back I talked about this? So systematic doctrine is the work of panditas, of scholars, and they are all into categorizing things. And so this is well represented by the Abhidharma tradition and the traditions that eventually come to kind of challenge Abhidharma, but they're still playing by that game, by those rules. And so like the debate, it says it's like Prasangika Madhyamaka is said to be the highest philosophical school according to Tibetan Buddhism. And this philosophical system, Prasangika, translates to consequentialist. Meaning what? Meaning their approach is using logic. Like, a consequence of saying this is this. And the consequence of this is this. Meaning the implications of you saying this is this. And if this is what you're saying, then the implications of that is that, and 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 that is that, until therefore it makes no sense. That's the Prasangika method, said to be Nagarjuna's method, although it's hard to say whether Nagarjuna himself was a consequentialist or not. But 3 or 4 generations later, Chandakirti definitely was a consequentialist. Based on this, this must be true. Based on this, this must be true. Based on this, this must be true. Then it will end up with something completely absurd. That is said to be a way to dispel confusion. So from Abhidharma to the consequentialists, this is what they are doing. Narrative kind of doctrine or the narrative, you find them in Jataka tales, stories from Buddha's life, the different masters, and they're stories. They don't give like complicated theory. Someone would ask Jigten Sungmin something and he will say, well, like that story, like this story. And in there is very different. Just Leonard, in making that point, he said, oh yeah, when I started, right? Leonard, you just, hey, are you there, still there?
Yep.
Yeah, when you say, you know, like Theravada, but then if you look at the stories of the Buddha, you know, scanning the world to see who he can help, you see, that's narrative.
Yeah, because usually most teachers will not emphasize on the point.
Yes.
And
because they are conditioned by official doctrine that they are supposed to believe, you see?
Correct.
Then there are all these stories. What do you do with them? They just kind of ignore these stories.
Correct. Usually they will say that, oh, it's just myth. You know, you read it for fun, but it doesn't have any main impact on the practice itself.
Yeah. So they want to dismiss the story because the story is a lot harder, to fit your story into the system that you have come up with. That's why Kyoba Rinpoche actually says, he says, I have no systems. Then people criticize and say, oh, that means you just do whatever you want. That's not what he's saying. But he's saying exactly what Nagarjuna said. I have no systems. But there are those who study Nagarjuna that turn I have no system into a system. And they say the highest of the systems is the system of no system. So, okay, now we start studying system. System 1, system 2, system 3. 2 is more profound than 1, 3 is more profound than 2, 4 is more profound than 3, and this and this and this. And finally, the highest system is the system of no system, which they say is the consequentialist, Prasangika Madhyamaka. Yeah, it's the same, you know, like in other areas, it's like, you know, oh, you are so sectarian, you are so sectarian, you are so sectarian. We are non-sectarian. Then before long, you know, there's a new sect called the non-sectarian sect. Same, you know, oh, this religion, this religion, this religion, this religion. Now you're all religions. Religions are all limited. We are beyond religion. Very soon, beyond religion is a religion. Yeah, Sobish tells us in introduction, you know, like especially in Dorshema and Rinjangma, these early commentaries, they have lots of stories. In fact, they have a whole appendix of stories that they tell. Because these early commentaries were not playing the game of the dialectics. The dialecticians, the logicians, the philosophers, they were not playing that game. They say fundamentally the Dharma is not that. Now, footnote, I see why that was necessary. Let's not think, oh, they all just got misled. No, no, no. That was necessary because in India, there were other traditions constantly wanting to debate and to challenge. So that led to a sharpening of ideas. Because you see, the non-intellectual method, right, which you can say Kyopa prefers that, can also become dogmatic. Yeah? Let's come to the Western context, right? The charismatic, the evangelicals, those, they don't want logic. Same, even in the Buddhist fold, you can have people who are not willing to analyze, and they just say, my guru says so. And that's enough for me. It can also lead to dogmatism. Oh, it's all beyond. Don't think about it. It can also lead to dogmatism. Traps everywhere. So don't go the other direction, and say, oh, I don't do this pandita thing. I don't do this studying thing. I don't do this philosophy thing. I don't do this. They're all misleading. La, 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 la. It's like, then you have now your new dogmatism, which is the dogmatism of no dogmatism. Yeah, we are amazing. Human beings and our confusions. Amazing. Yeah, so I would say, if we think, oh, of course Buddhas exist, they exist to benefit beings. If you're very comfortable with that idea, then you should study a little bit about how Buddhas don't exist. Because you need to do a little bit of that in a way, you could say, to purify your view, so that your view doesn't turn Buddhas into like, another name for like God or angels. Yeah. So it's about, balancing everything. And in that way, we're not stuck within a system. And we have to defend the system, Yeah, so today we'll stop here. We'll continue on Wednesday. This next statement is not easy. Yeah. Because this is, again, all it has to do with, the state of Buddha. And even at the intellectual level of understanding this, unless we have studied quite extensively all the different debates about, what Buddha is or is not, it's hard for us to see the contrast that Kyopa Rinpoche's statement is presenting. Yeah. So not just on the level of, well, since we're not Buddhas, how can we understand Buddhas? I mean, that's a given, right? But here is also about, if you're not familiar with all the debates and all the, for the last 2,600 years, all the ways of speaking of what Buddhas are or are not, then it's hard for us to see how radical or how different Gilbert Rinpoche. But what I can say again is going back to the statements that we have covered. To me, they're really pointing to how if we view the things that we practice now as merely tools to achieve something that is totally different from what we're doing here, then even on the level of using these tools, they become ineffective. They become ineffective. So we have to, our relationship to our practices has to be more that relationship of, they are not like instrumental. They are not like means to an end. And therefore, right, the ends justify the means. And therefore we might think, you know, we can just find some means to get there. Maybe means that are not, you know, even mentioned here. Somebody asked me and say, oh, well, if prostration, you know, is about stretching the channels, why don't you do yoga instead? It's like, well, none of the lineage masters recommended that. Yeah, if you become too clever, you know, and you think, oh, the means, you know, justify the ends, then I can go find some more efficient means, you know. And then I said, yeah, you get the medieval torture machine, you know, where they stretch you, you know. And why don't you do Yongwondro like this, you know? You can just crank it up, stretch, 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 you know. Obviously, that's not going to make you a Buddha. But the method of, you know, prostration, it's about surrendering. It's about all your stubborn ideas. When you physically go down on the ground in front of the Buddhas, in front of someone, you're surrendering. To the degree that you surrender your ego, to that degree that stretch can stretch your inner channels. And all of that, you know, given by, you know, the lineage, tested, tried, they are all elements of manifesting those qualities and not instruments to get somewhere. Yeah, so relate to our practices not as a way to get somewhere. Then you will always be like, you know, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Right? But rather, you know, the moment we practice, we are there. This, in the end, you know, is in fact what Deji Yoga is. And so elsewhere, you know, Gilbert Rinpoche in one statement, he says, you know, some people say, you know, all the elements in the generation stage is something that you pretend. Yes, there are explanations like that. Like fake it until you make it. Right? You're pretending to be Buddha. And therefore, all the steps in the generation stage is all based on pretending. Gilbert Rinpoche in one of the Vajra statements says, no. All the steps in the generation stage exist on the level of Buddha. At the Buddha stage, all those elements are there. So then, when now we do it, if we have the attitude of like, oh, this is all pretending, then, again, borrowing from the Zen story, you know, then no amount of sitting meditation will make you a Buddha. If you don't understand that fundamentally, to sit is to be Buddha. So one example in the Zen, a famous story. A student is meditating. Then he hears a sound, Then he realizes it's his teacher, like kind of around him. Then more sounds, Finally he stopped and he looked. And his teacher was like taking up a floor towel that has come loose, And teacher took the towel and the teacher was polishing it. And the student's like, what are you doing, teacher? He said, I'm polishing this towel, Then teacher said, what are you doing? And the student said, oh, I'm meditating. And the teacher said, why? And the student said, well, to become Buddha. Then the student said, and why are you polishing a towel? He says, to make a mirror. Yeah. And the student said, well, no amount of polishing that towel is going to make you a Buddha. It's going to make you a mirror. Yeah? No amount of polishing that towel is going to make it a mirror. The student teacher said, yeah, similarly, no amount of meditating is going to make you a Buddha. Yeah, you cannot become what you are not. Now the student understood, I do not meditate to become Buddha. I meditate because that is the being of a Buddha. That's how Buddhas are. So likewise, we do not practice generosity to become Buddha. We practice generosity because Buddhas are generous. We do not practice ethical conduct to become Buddha. We practice ethical conduct because Buddhas do no harm. We do not practice patience to become Buddha because patience is the essence of Buddhas. We do not give up. We have joyful effort throughout, not so that we can become Buddhists, but that is the nature of Buddhists. We do not practice meditative evenness to become Buddhists, but Buddhists are naturally in a state of meditative equipoise. We do not learn wisdom, practice meditation to become Buddhists, but wisdom is the very mind of Buddhists. See the difference? Yeah, qualitatively. And this is what Vajrayana means when it says the result becomes the path. Okay? Chanchu semchu rinpoche magye panam ge gyuche ge pa nyam pa me pa yang gong gong du bel wor shu. So we dedicate merit not because, to become Buddhists. We dedicate merit because Buddhists are always dedicating merit. Make sense? Yeah, so